Been a busy 3 months.
Particularly around 8 or 9 years old, I had a friend who was a little white girl that my auntie worked for their family. And oftentimes I would go with her to help her with some of the chores and taking trash and things like that out. And so one day we were told that we couldn't play together anymore. And it was very hard for me to understand what that was all about. But later on, my aunt explained to me the differences that Black children could not really have friends with white children. And so for me, that was startling. As a child, I didn't know what that truly meant. But over the years, I began to see and understand more about color and the line that we have to deal with because we're Black. So I got that early experience. And then when we were trying to go to school every day, having to pass the white school at Carolyn Brevard right there in Smoky Hollow, to walk about 2 or 3 miles to Bond Elementary School once we started there in first grade. That was tough, to have a school in your backyard, and then you couldn't go there, and then you had to travel and walk every day back and forth 3 miles to school. So that to me was very startling. And as a child, I've always had that in my head. I never could remember not thinking about that wherever I went throughout my lifetime. So all I can say is that for a child who has friends, it's difficult to stop liking somebody just because they have skin color different from yours. And as children, typically it doesn't really matter to us. It's the adults, I think, that have the issue, the problems that they have to look at and see and examine. Well, what can I do differently? How can I raise my child differently? And listen to my auntie trying to explain that to me. It's very interesting because she tried everything to say, well, these people are good people. Your friend is a good person. And well, then my question was, well, am I not a good person that, they would want to have time to spend with me? And we've been knowing each other for almost since childhood, early childhood, when it was I think I was maybe 6 years that we started this relationship. Actually before then, because my aunt had worked with them for many years. So we grew up together until we were about 9 years old. So that to me struck out big time in my family life.
So you hit on some key things. And a lot of the stuff that's often said is children don't come in the world. They're not born with biases. They learn biases, they learn racism, they learn all of this stuff because of their upbringing and their exposure to things from their families and just other people. Let's unpack that a little bit. What are your thoughts on that and the role that we as adults must play in the life of children so that we interrupt these cycles?
Well, in my family life, having grown up in Smoky Hollow, there were certain things we were always taught. First was the love of God and for the Creator, that this family life is so important. You have to have that. We have to recognize who are people who've gone before us and their struggle. We have to recognize our elders and honor their presence in our lives. We have to know exactly what's important in terms of family life. And extended families to us was the key. We always had family around. So we grew up learning about the importance of having communion, collective action, responsibility together with each other. So when you think about early childhood and you have family around you, you have everything. So folks would think that we were pretty poor, and I didn't realize how poor we were until I started learning about the data in my early years of high school. But I didn't have a clue that much of what I was experiencing on a day-to-day basis was being studied like a sociology, like that. I wasn't supposed to come up out of Smoky Hollow. That wasn't a place for us to be able to strive and prosper. But what I've also learned that those were the conditions in which we lived. It wasn't who we were. So we lived in very shanty type housing, but inside our house, inside of our community, there was lots of love, there was family, there was always someone there to make sure we were accountable for our actions. We had lots of food because we lived in a place that had gardens and folks grew food every day. We also had camaraderie, people who cared about us, and having an extended family had a lot to do with, I think, early rearing of a child and teaching children the way they ought to deal with other people. For instance, going to Bible study and Bible classes at our church at St. John AME Church. That's one of my first church schools where we all went to school at early on. We were taught about loving one another, about treating your brothers and sisters the way you want to be treated. Those are fundamental values that we learned. And we knew that if we did differently, we had to suffer the consequences. So when you teach a child early on in their life what they ought to do, there are certain things they will not steer away from. They will actually follow that route unless there's other types of interventions that occur. So yes, we had a lot of direct intervention. We had a lot of love. We had caring. We had people who wanted to do the right thing and wanted us to do the right thing. And they expected us to be at our best all the time. So high level expectations is something that I think that we have to all put on our children so they know that you have expectations of them. You want them to achieve. You want them to exceed. You want them to do best. But, we know too that there are structural barriers that keep a lot of our children from being able to obtain that. So answer your question in short, yes, there are things that would cause us to differ from what we've grown up with because of the background and the family life we've had. I give you one good example. When we were living in Smoky Hollow, and I came home one day, and my aunt told us that we were moving because the urban renewal plan had been approved, and so we had to leave the space. And so for me, I didn't understand those language, urban renewal, all that kind of stuff, why we had to leave our space. And having to leave that space brought about a lot of changes. One thing was the fact that our family couldn't stay together anymore. So we have, our cousins in them, and our aunties in them, and grandma those. Those folks, when we left, were scattered in other communities. Some went to Boston, where our family tend to go during migration. Some people ended up in the country. Some people ended up in the Allen subdivision, in the Bond area, in Frenchtown, in Springfield, in Griffin Heights, all the areas in which I work with now. Our families migrated there because they had nowhere else to go. And many of them ended up homeless. And so when you break up a family just because there needed to be some renewal going on in the community or some development, it was just heartbreaking to have that experience so early. We lost our extended family. So at that moment, it really resonated with me that being in a family is probably the most important thing that you can have with a child. A child has to have that consistency. And when you break it out and you don't have a father, sometimes you don't have a mother for whatever the reasons are. You have aunties and uncles. You have grandparents who are no longer there when you get home from school. So then your schoolwork is not going to be the same. Your discipline is not going to be the same. Your structure is not going to be the same. The people around you have changed differently. And so you don't know what to expect anymore. So I think consistency in a child's life is so important. And we hear a lot about these ACEs, what they call the adverse childhood experiences. Mm-hmm. We need to learn a little bit more about how that works and how these impacts on early childhood development can really change the way children see the world and foster certain types of behaviors early on in life. So
you hit on a couple key things, and one of the things that I often have a lot of conversations with people, close friends and colleagues about the role that poverty plays in everything going on in our community, in our world. And you alluded to it a little bit, just kind of talking about family members being scattered and certain individuals ending up homeless. And now you're working in the community where there's a whole lot of poverty. So what do you think the impact is that poverty has on the community right now in those areas?
Excellent question. Well, you know that we suffer disproportionately for everything. You can multiply it by 2. Many times you can go up to 5 to 7, depending on what area you're talking about in the system. We are all parts of systems. And in these systems, whether in education, whether it's healthcare, whether it's the criminal justice system, whether it's in economics, whether it's in banking, transportation, all these systems impact us in a collaborative way, so you think about it. So poverty is like that, it's just not one thing that people have to deal with every day. They have to deal with all these systems of things that impact how they move about, how they have their families. And we all know the stories of moms who have children who can't get to transportation, the car is broken down, and just one time this happens and everything is falling apart. And if you're out of work, you can't take care of your child. If you can't provide them the help they need with learning how to do the math, I have hard times with that, with helping my grandchildren. But those are the kinds of things that parents don't get enough support. We don't often include those parents in this equation, but they are suffering. Many of our family members are suffering. Our men are in jail. They have difficulty as young boys early on being labeled, as being disruptive, all the types of things that get us in trouble early on just because we look Black. There's a tendency to think that we're all troublemakers and that kind of thing, that our children are always going to be disruptive and disorderly. And so you get assigned those labels. And once they get assigned to kids, you start taking out the men in the families. You start taking out the folks that matter. And in the cases where impoverished people have a lot of experiences, is around the welfare system. As a social worker, one of the things I've learned, and I had to quit a job based on this, was that early on, we were taught that, when you go into a home and a family need to get welfare, the FDC, there could not be a man in that house unless they were married. And so we had to report that. And so I found myself in an awkward position, trying to get women who desperately needed the help from the system, but the barriers that were put there did not allow them to get that help. So if you had a man who you typically need in your family, in your life, then you were penalized for that. What kind of system would do that? What kind of environment do we have that we're raising up our children to think that this is okay? To say that a person can't get the support they need because they got a man in the house and they're not married. Come on. So these types of things get in the way. The other thing is our families have been in these generational kinds of poverty positions for so long that it just goes on. And to break out of it is very difficult unless we have another way of looking at the world, another way of really saying, oh, it's not just about being equal. We've experienced equal, separate but equal. I experienced it. I understand how that works. It may look like it's equal, but when you get inside, there's nothing equal about it. But so I'm thinking, what about equity here? That's a whole nother word that we have to think hard about and put into our vocabulary. Because unless we are looking at the needed resources, the gaps in resources that people have or do not, we need to make sure that we can get people at least to another level of a playing field. People in poverty don't stand a chance unless the systems in place start to change. All these systems call what they call infrastructure. It's structural racism. Nobody wants to talk about it. We talked about that earlier before. That's for people who are poor. Poverty is just another side of the coin of what we say. We're talking about racism.
Woo! Yeah, that was real good right there. So I'm kind of looking at who we have on the call, and we actually have quite a bit of young professionals, some college students on the phone. Kind of talk to us a little bit about what was that point in your life that you realized you wanted to be a change agent, and what did that season look like for you?
I don't think I was always conscious of it per se, except I do remember once younger, in our community, a lot of us who didn't have resources to funding found ways to take care of themselves. And a lot of the people in our families were people who were skilled artisans. They built homes, they were masons, they were carpenters, they were roofers, and they did work, honest to goodness work. And there were other people who, use the system to help support them, like those who sold alcohol before we were able to do that legally. So that, I saw the result of that very traumatic in my life, where people had excessive amount of alcohol, and folks were always introduced to the toxicity in our community. There was a lot of workers' progress type of administration stuff going on, you know, energy plants, incineration, spraying for mosquitoes. People were exposed to a lot of that every single day. And so people would say, what about the smoke that's come from Smokeaholic? What's that all about? But all the things that were going on, you know, you have an incinerator running, you got a gas program happening, you have water quality, you have everything going on in that area. And then people are cooking and sewing and washing clothes for folk to make money. So I said to myself, well, I don't know if I want to do this, you know, all my life. I don't think I want to be in this type of environment where, you know, I'm exposed to these toxicities. I'm running behind these trucks with the DDT. We didn't know any better, but that they came every day, and we thought the smoke was interesting. And so many people in our families have died early on, didn't even make it to 50. 55 was a pretty high. And if you were able to get to 65, we were really good. So seeing these types of conditions where people went to the hospital too early, people died early, folks were engaged in conversations with alcohol, tend to get, you know, exacerbated and cause all types of energy changing, you know, personality changing. And I thought, I need to do something with this. I could be a social, I didn't say social worker, but I wanted to be something to help people. And so that's when I think I started to think about how to help other people so they don't have to go through these traumatic experiences every day. Folks were so poor in many instances. Some people didn't have work, you know, some people didn't have the skilled labor advances. Some people didn't have the domestic work available to them, like many of the family members I'm familiar with. So, and then people own their own businesses. You know, Smokeaholic was a very thriving community, whether you know it or not. It'd be good for people to take a look at our history through the Howe's Historic Architectural Review and through the Library of Congress. It talks about Smokeaholic and what kinds of experiences we had there in the 1800s and up into 1960s. So I think my early start was there. You know, when I saw people suffering, changing behavior and attitude for drinking, actually I said, no, this is not the way to go. And my first training was actually around substance abuse and alcohol use. And I kind of stayed in that field for a long time because I followed with mental health after that. So it's been interesting. Healthcare, the need to take care of people, you know, watching people who are ill, going and sitting with the elderly, you know, those types of things that we learned early on. We had to take food to people who were sick. My aunts, I remember very clearly, we would always take food to the hobos, you know, when they get off the train right there, the silver meter coming through Smokeaholic. Sometimes they would have beans, sometimes they have greens and cornbread, but we would always find a way to take care of folks. So it's been in my DNA, I guess, for years, taking care of other people. As you mentioned earlier, that service mentality, you know, the need to make sure we are service to people, all people, which is important.
Awesome. So so I have so many things running through my mind. We may have to do a part 2. I can already see it. But a good friend of mine, we often talk about growing up poor and not necessarily realizing how poor we were. And you hit on that a little while ago, and it just came up in the chat. Somebody was just talking about that. And the reason why I want to address it, because when you start to talk about community, it seems like you had a very rich experience growing up, not rich necessarily in monetary value, but the sense of community and family and the skills that you learn. So when we kind of put that in the context of today, what do you think is missing that's keeping us from having that same sense of community, regardless of our socioeconomic status?
Well, there's certain things that when you grow up in our family, anyway, we were taught, and one had to do with communalism. It's about us together working with everybody else. We're not isolated. So we grew up with a large group in our family, and we had extended families all around us. So we learned early on that importance. The value of egalitarianism, you know, equal in some ways, but also roles distinguished in other ways, and respecting where your roles are and knowing where you place in that role, that you have some obligation and responsibility in the family life. So it makes a difference, I think, when you learn early on about basic principles. You know, in African thought, the African worldview suggests these same types of things. And I've grown up learning about who I am as an African woman and understanding that when you're talking about family, it's just not a nuclear family. It's an extended family always, you know, because my cousins and them, and my brothers and my cousins and my sisters and them, these are real to African American families. So we learned early about the value of taking care of each other. The second thing is that if sharing, we do share. We believe that what I have, you can have, and all the things that you talked about early on about taking care of being the servant person is critical. So yeah, when people are impoverished, there tend to be a lot of attention paid to family life, storytelling, being engaged with each other, learning about who you are, paying particular attention to our children, you know, because we know they have to be protected in so many ways. And we had that level of love and protection. And so I think today, a lot of us are missing that because our families have been broken apart so much. Everybody is individual. You know, this is me, myself, and I. Culture. It's not us, we, and them, you know, kind of thing. We work together collectively. Collective work and responsibility has always been key. And if you have that mentality growing up, you tend to stick with it over time. And maybe sometimes you may fall off it. You may want your own house, you know, because you want to have some space for yourself. But I found one thing very interesting with that. A lot of the young women that I work with today, particularly those who are young mothers, they've had children and they've found themselves in their nice home by themselves with their husband, maybe another child, but nobody to help them rear the children. Children need more enforcement. They need more structure around. They need more people to love them and care for them, to be responsible for them. And when you're doing it by yourself, it's very hard. And I heard one woman tell us, and that she didn't realize how important it was to have somebody living with her when she had a baby. Because now she had to take care of herself by herself, you know, because her husband's working, a boyfriend, whatever, and they don't have that type of support. But when you have an extended family, it makes all the difference for the child. And you got to know that my emphasis here is on developing this child, the mentality of this baby that we are bringing forth. And one of the things in African thought has always been, and Frederick Douglass always talks about how important it is to educate women, because we really are the nurturers. We take care of the family. We take care of the community. We take care of the world, actually. And so for us to fall and falter on individualism, forget collective activity, to falter on having your own space, which is all good. Everybody wants some space for themselves, but you don't want to isolate the other people who are near to you and give the children a chance. So the more you can give your children, get them engaged and understand it's not just about them. They're not the center of the universe. They have responsibilities too. And when you raise them like that, and people will say all the time, well, hey, I don't want to raise my children like my mother raised me, but you know what? The way we were raised, it was tough because nobody gave us any real leeway, you know, to get away with stuff. We were given strict guidelines. They were expected to enforce them. We had moral values and principles that were given to us in our church. And the mothers and the deacons and the brothers and everyone there made sure that we adhered to those. And kids need structure. So if you have an opportunity to always have a way to engage with other people around helping you develop your young child, then you're going to be better off for it, and your child will be better off for it in the long run. So yeah, I agree that today, more than ever, our young people need to understand how valuable they have, the values they have, and how important it is to listen and talk with their elders. Most people, the kids are asked, what's your grandmama's name? Grandma, what's her maiden name? Oh, maiden name? Please, let's talk to our children about who we are, what our names are, what's significant in a name, why you named the way you were. You know, how does that impact your life? And you
Right.
have to be careful about naming as well. So all those things are important.
Right. Awesome. Awesome. So kind of shifting a little bit, what do you think is some of the biggest challenges that Black people are facing right now?
I think voice, our voices are not really being heard as much. That's critical and important for us. Our ability to speak out and speak up and stand up is often challenged when we start to say things, because typically we can lose our jobs, we can lose our position, our status, we can lose our lives behind our words, our speech, and things of that sort. So that's a big challenge. Our ability to vote, because you can speak, you know, very silently when you vote. Voting is critical, and that's one thing we learned early on. And in our community, Black folks love to vote, you know, particularly the older ones. The young people don't think about it as much, but they really need to change that thinking and think critically about how important this is. And the fact that so many people before you struggled and died so that you can have the right to vote. So being able to have your voice, to stand for something that makes a difference in your life, to speak to people respectfully always. But you know, I think to me, the main thing is for us to look at how we deal with these systems before us, taking that risk to say, this is not correct. This is not the way to do things. Let's try something different. Let's foster relationships with people who can help us make the differences in our community. And we always know that whatever difference we make in our community in Black lives, everybody, you know, prospers. You know, this is the benefit of having been Black in my lifetime, that we do good things. We try to do better as we grow up, because that's what we're taught. And as we become adults, we try to make that life beneficial to people around us as well. So speaking up, speaking out, voting, and Lord, do get your education. Don't drop out of school, young people. Stick with it if you can. Let somebody help you. Get our parents engaged. You know, let the parents be the monitors in the schools. When we were in school, if a parent was coming to school, we knew it. And everybody was on their best behavior. We didn't need the police in the schools. We needed our family members. You know, we needed our moms, our dads who took on those shifts. And you can actually create some jobs from something like that. So thinking creatively out of the box, doing what we do best, and giving the best of our service to people is probably what we all know and know how to do well in our community.
So just jumping in for a minute here, what do you think are some of those racist systems that deliberately destroy and cripple the Black community?
Well, the first I said was criminal justice, because while we are underrepresented in the community overall in terms of population, we tend to be overrepresented in the criminal justice system. That's just a fact everywhere you go. You know, Black people are 13, 14, 15% of the population, but we make up 30, 40, 50% of the criminal justice system. That, to me, is rogue. That doesn't make sense. You know, why is that? Well, it starts early. I've seen it. Labeling in school, you know, you start labeling kids where you can't learn, you got this, you got that, you know, so you need to go to a special class. And after a while, kids not going to school. So you know education is critical. You're setting them on this road. You know, suspensions, expulsions are typically the things that get our children who don't want to go to school in the beginning, you know, to stay there. They won't do it if you keep suspending them. In-school suspension may work, and you need to have some real structured programming for that so that you don't have to send them home. Truancy, you know, officers that were in the community to know when you were absent, critical. You know, you have to have those types of things. So criminal justice is one of the major ones for me, because it takes away the men in our families. It takes away the women for little things that they wouldn't ordinarily get. So you multiply it again 2 or 3 times. If I was arrested for a crime and a little white kid was, a white boy, a white girl was arrested for the same crime, you better believe the sentences are going to be different, 2 to 3 times different. We saw it with the drug war on drugs and all this. It is same war on poverty. All those things are just key words to say, okay, we're going after the Black people in another different way. So this is a way that we have to recognize and know what's happening in our communities. So the education, criminal justice, they work together. It's just hard. When you know by the 3rd grade that a child is not going to be able to finish school, they're going to drop out, then you're going to create a prison bed because they coming your way. They have nowhere else to go if they can't get a good education, they can't get a decent job, they can't support their families the way they want to. Well, they're going to leave. And then what happens? The family is left struggling in poverty because they don't have a good base of support from everyone in their family who can make contributions, who can make productive decisions or have income that support our family members. So I can name them. You get the banking system. Oh, that's one of the biggest ones. You can't get credit. You can't get a checking account. It's just hard. When you're poor and Black in this area, it's very difficult. And of course, juvenile justice, we really take a look strongly at what juvenile justice system is doing, because it's getting our young people too early into the system, and many of our children are not treated properly. The stories already about the mistreatment and maltreatment of our young men and boys when they go into these systems, and now young women and girls, the same thing. We are seeing this happening. And it's not to say that all people should be treated the same. I think special people need special treatment. In this case, where you've had children who've been for so long treated in a negative way, in terms of who they are and their behavior, and then how they can speak to certain things, if they can't speak to things, if they do a certain action, if they don't do a certain action, and they're punished for that. What happens to that person over time? How you wear down that spirit and their moral values, it just doesn't seem to work well. So until we get these systems right, and then we keep thinking about certain words that we can't use in our community, like we were told a couple of years ago, you can't use climate control and you can't say racism. Come on, people. This is a new day. We know it's there. It's been here. Climate issues are going to be with us. Environmentally, we're impacted. Things are changing around us. You can see it. Racism has been with us forever. It's institutionalized. It's structural. It's in every system that we can name. We got to recognize this. And I say to people, particularly our women, we have to really step it up a little notch, because we're losing our men in so many ways. They're so violent in some ways. They're short-tempered. They're killing our women. They're abusing our children. And this is to say that something is not right in the system of things that we see in the order of family life. The importance of that, community-based types of things happening, so families in every community can be safe and feel like they have a good neighborhood to have their children be raised in. Yeah, all the systems need to get working and be active. And everybody who's a leader in this community ought to be thinking real hard about what they can do, what they can work towards in their particular small environment to address these issues of family life. Because the family is the greatest institution we have. And if we don't let that grow and develop, we're going to be in some serious trouble, which we already are. But let's think about that, how important this is in terms of these systems that have been destroying our families for many years. And it doesn't just destroy us, it destroys everybody who's around us too. And so white families, your families are just at risk. So you watch the trend. Things that happen to us probably won't happen in your family right away, but believe me, it's coming back to you at some point in time. And so we women have to stand up and help our men to get to a point where they can understand, not everything needs to be a fight. Not everything needs to be physical. Not everything needs to be controlled. What can we do differently? Where's the love? Everybody always laughs about Rodney King, just can't we all get together and love each other, be together? I mean, that's simple kind of a message, but it's a very important message for all of us today to think about.
Ooh, that's good. That's good. So I want to kind of jump to the chat. The chat is like blowing up and I love it. And the first person I want to go to, and I actually want her to ask the question out loud, and I know she's okay with that because she's attended a lot of our trainings. But Miss Deborah Lloyd, if you can unmute yourself and ask that question, I think it'll be great to hear from Miss Miaisha on that.
Hi, Deborah. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute.
She's unmuted. Okay,
yes.
You're unmuted.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Yes.
We can hear
Hello?
you, yes.
Yes.
What's your question, Deborah?
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Ask your question.
Hello?
Oh, man.
So it seems like Deborah, can you hear us?
Okay, you're fading in and out.
Okay.
Oh, so
You
my
wanna
question was, okay, so my question.
Can you hear her?
I'm going to ask her question.
Yeah, you may have to do that for her.
So she's asking, what's the significance of AA, African American led programs and services in the Black community?
Oh, very significant indeed. I think people like to be around people who look like them, particularly children. It's not to say I don't like anybody else and I want to be with anyone else. But when children are given the role models and people who care about them, who have expectations of them, and they look like them, it does something for a child. It does something. There's something wrong with that. I believe it's important to have the curriculum that deals with who we are, learning about our history. Very important. Many of us don't know our history. We don't understand what's happening right now today, how we got to this place, because we don't know the history and the fights that people have struggled for over the years. And this little history we do get, the significance of our role in that history has not really been prevalent. And so I would say definitely a very important component. And it should be something that we look into seriously because some children thrive better in those environments. It's just a fact. And the more we put them in an environment that helps them to become to their fullest, develop young person, family person, community person, then the better for all of us. So yeah, you're right on. It's a great question.
And I think that's really, really good because I think from a leadership standpoint, there's often not enough Black people at the table. And if they are at the table, if we are at the table, it's very few, or you may not necessarily be able to sit at the head of the table. So I think that's really, really important. The gift of exposure can really, really change your whole mindset. And so
Sure.
that exposure to see people look like you, doing important work in the community and being in leadership roles, that's super important and very vital. So I'm glad that you mentioned that.
Very good.
So one of the other questions kind of hits on, it's a question in the comment, it kind of hits on whether or not the system is actually broken or whether or not it was designed that way to keep people down. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, understand race and racism and understand what it means, how it's practiced, what it looks like, which oftentimes we don't know what we're looking at. We don't recognize it when we see it. Many of our kids have said, oh, there's no racism. I never experienced this. I don't know what it looks like until they saw George Floyd. Then they start looking, oh, wow, this is something. This may look like what they've been talking about. And that's to the extreme. But there are so many ways that you can recognize it if you know your history, if you've studied a little bit and learned and talked a little about what does racism look like? How is it practiced in everyday life? Racism is not just a happening. Racism has been with us since the day we came to this country. There's always been a design, a law, a program, a constitutional revision. Those things were done just because Black people had to be in their place. Black people had to know what their places were and what they are still today. So there are people who still have these visions of us, you know, being these criminals. And so you have these laws that were written specifically to criminalize a whole nation of people, Black people, you know. So the more we look at that, the better we are able to understand that race and privilege have a lot to do, and power, a greater amount to do with the decisions that are made, the policies that are made, and the impact that these policies and decisions can have on families, individuals, because of the skin tone, the color of their skin. So I'm saying to you that it's structural. It's designed that way. It's just not a happenstance. It's something that we need to know exists, and we need to figure out how we can address it collectively, all of us together. It's because I said before, it's just not for Black people to deal with racism. It's a white thing. You know, it's for white women and white men to come together and say, hey, this can't be it. Because folks would always say, well, I wasn't there. I didn't do it. My great-great-great-great-grandparents did that. Well, it's okay. But here we are today. You know, we got to be change agents. We have to be the ones that make a difference, because there are a lot of times we are stuck in this position, particularly as baby boomers. We've had the benefit of having seen and walked this walk for many years, both Black and white, you know, so we would know what the issues are. So what are we going to do about it? Are we going to stay silent? Are we going to speak our voices? Are we going to let it be known that we are in powerful positions? I can change this law. I can make new policies. I can look at ordinances. You know, what is this different that I could do in my little small world difference, and then come together on a larger scale to have serious conversation? We're not talking about it. People get scared. And I've had situations where we're doing undoing racism workshops that everybody should have a participation in. How do you deal with this issue? How do you recognize it? What are systems, and what do you do as an individual? What do you do as a group? And some people get very sensitive and want to cry about it. You know, there are some heart-wrenching types of stories that you hear about racism that you wouldn't even think that would be racist. Why would that? But you don't know the impact it's having on somebody else. You know, so you may not see it as a white person because you live privilege. You have never had to worry about if your child's going to come home at night. I had 2 boys, and my boys growing up, I could never go to sleep at night once they got home after 12 o'clock. I would have to be up and waiting and watching. And every time they left their house, I was anxious about what was going to happen. Are they going to be okay? Even with my daughter, the same way. I would just wonder about their safety all the time. You don't have to have that burden. You know, most white folks don't even have the thought that something could happen to their child, but we raised with that. And so when I saw George Floyd, it something struck me deep in my belly. You know, it's like, wow, is that what it's come to? That little white boys are able to put their knee on the neck of my little Black boy and not think anything about it? You know, come on, folks. That's my child I'm looking at. I'm looking at this Black man here. My son, the same age, older than he. It was just an amazing kind of thing that happened to me that day. I mean, I boohooed like a baby because I couldn't do anything with it. I had no controls. I felt helpless. But I, as a mother, my appeal is to white mothers. That's my child. That's your child. What can we do different to change that scenario? We cannot allow anger and these injustices in our systems continue, and we keep our children at a level where they just don't know anything else to do but hurt and kill and maim and maul, and just not take into consideration the lives of other people. This is just an example, but there's so many more that we should know about. And you learn them through your daily experiences, but you don't talk about them. You know, we complain about them, but we don't talk about them in a been done. So yeah, this thing
Ooh.
exists and it's real.
That was really, 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 really powerful. A lot of people felt that very, very powerful. You hit on so many things. I mean, the need for white allies, the fact that Black women, Black people shouldn't have to teach white people about racism. I mean, you just hit on so many things. But just kind of unpacking that a little bit from a local standpoint, what are your thoughts about policing here, and what are those changes that need to happen here locally to start to dismantle some of the things that are going on right here in this community?
That's part of your question, but I think I understand what you're asking. So here locally in Tallahassee, having been born and raised here and watched things happen over the years, I understand how police work. I understand how the sheriff department works. My family's been teaching all that for many years on the good side and the bad side. So I understand it. I also understand
So I think she muted herself.
No, am I there?
Okay, you're back now. You were muted for a moment.
Oh, I didn't touch. Okay. Well, so I don't know what the last thing you heard, but my thinking is that there's similarities in the way police are trained, having lived in several states and watched interactions. My experience in St. Louis really is the one that I would bring here in terms of community-oriented policing. I learned a lot about police during that time because we were forced to work out an arrangement with St. Louis was going through a lot of trauma and crime and issues with the young people and with the elderly, complain about neighborhood safety. And so they instituted the community-oriented policing system, which is COPS that we've heard about and that our community is working towards now. And I really so enjoyed that program because it brought the police into another perspective, that they too have issues and they have concerns, they have families, they have to go home at night, take care of their loved ones, etc. But they also had a duty to perform, to provide services, to protect community in which they were paid to do. And so getting them out into the community, forming those relationships is critical. And having the talks, police that don't necessarily talk a lot about what issues are that they have to deal with, force and what that means, unless you're in a position in your community where you can go to those forums and you can listen. The ordinary person doesn't have an opportunity unless you come into your neighborhood meetings, which we all should be coming to and be involved in and know what's happening in our area. Then you don't necessarily get a chance to interact with the police in a similar way. So we've got our issues, believe me, but I do believe that it's something that we can work on. And I think that when they talk about defunding the police or reforming the police, it's not an all bad kind of a thing. I think what it is that the police have their issues in their terms, the people have their issues in their terms. What they look like together, if we are talking about creating a society that everybody is safe, not just one or two individuals based on whatever the issues are, or the color of somebody's skin, dictating how they should be protected or not protected, or their medical condition, those types of things. And so I would suggest, that we could do this talk and that every officer, every leader in this community ought to undergo something called it's a wonderful training structural program. It's just not a class where you have 2 or 3 hours of orientation. It systemically lays out all the needs, the values, the activities, the way you want to move about, the meanings, the terminology, the history, all that together. How you It's been with us forever. And lots of people tell you don't really want to change the system because now you're breaking down those systems that help you get to where you are. But we have to find new ways of these things. And unless we are and doing the necessary training, then we definitely won't be able to get beyond here. And we have to move towards policies, just not feeling good kind of thing we're talking about. Because when you come to these racism training workshops, really bad about a lot of stuff. Believe it, when you come out of it, if you get through it without getting all pissed off and upset, then you really would made a big difference in your community. So learning to work together, to come to community, to know who the community are, and to get a bicycle, for crying out loud. You know, some communities, you need to roll around in your car all the time. Get some physical activity. I think the police sometimes probably need to work on getting more physically active too. You know, I think that's a very good thing to help them give their energy. And hopefully they can change some of their policies around shooting. You know, shoot somebody in the leg, you know, whatever. But shooting to kill is not the thing to do. I mean, that's just a value that I hold. And I'm thinking that some other people may have that same value, particularly when it comes to our children and our families and our young men and boys and girls and your kids too.
So we've talked about race, we've talked about community, and we've talked about resilience. As a community mother, and as we get ready to close out this conversation, what's your charge to us? What's that piece of wisdom to keep us moving forward so that we can all work together to make things better in Tallahassee?
Doing unto others as you have them do unto you, basic. It doesn't change much and hasn't changed over the years, but it's a fundamental principle and a value that I hold. And I believe that equity is something that we have to consider in this formula, because you can do unto others, but then some others may need to have more done for them or to them to help them get to where they need to be. We've been in a place for so long that our level playing field is very hard to get to. This is unless people talk about reparations and all that, unless we're getting to real reparations where those GIs who never got their chance to get their GI Bill and get their homes can now finally get that. All those people who were denied their benefits and services for all the things they've contributed, let that be known. Give the financial support, because people need help. Talk is good, but the structural foundation, finances help to make that occur. You need the social values, the moral principles. Those all together can develop what we call a good system, a system of care of people. You know, how do you make sure that your community is safe? All of us together. How do you make sure that your families are safe? All of us together. How do you make sure that all of us together? And how do we make sure that we as a collective are working to make things happen for the benefit of the whole? This is not just about me. It's about us working together as a collaborative, an egalitarian system of thought. All the labeling and all that kind of things needs to go to the side. And let's think about reform in a different type of way. Systems, you know, how do we make that happen? How do we speak our voices? How do we make it known? And for goodness sakes, let's get to the polls this year. You got to vote. Young people, I'm depending on you all to make sure you get it out. There's lots of mailing in applications now for you. Those who can't make it back to Tallahassee, there are mail-in ballots. Use them. They do work. Tallahassee has a very good system. So I've been working the polls for years and will continue to do so. So those types of things, we can have better systems. We can have better ways to take care of these issues like poor transportation, issues like NAG problems with utilities and people can't pay their rent and those types of things. You know, transportation always is an issue for us. You know, why can't everybody have a decent car? You know, what's wrong with that? You know, if somebody had a decent car and they can transport their children where they need to go, they can get to work on time, get the kids to school and all that kind of thing. let's help people who cannot really help themselves. And it's not thought about as an affirmative action necessary. It's thought about something that on an equal level, well, beyond equal and equality is equity. What resources are needed. And so when we in leadership are driving this train, we're making sure that the money is not given just for a good program. The money is given and follows the need of whoever it is in our community that needs that support. The money follows the need. And until we get to that, we're going to have some difficulties moving forward and changing the system. It's a system of care that we're trying to do, and we all should be practicing it. How do you make sure that we, as families, work together for the benefit of our children so they can grow to be productive citizens?
Thank you. Woo! So we have been blessed for the last hour to soak up the wisdom of Miss Miaisha. So grateful. And we just want to thank her once again for her time today. Thank you all for joining us. This was a very powerful and much needed conversation. If for some reason you want the recording of the training, please send me an email. If you want to look back over it or share it with your team, we are happy to send that to you. It's now 10:59, so we're going to go ahead and close out and be respectful of everybody's time. But thank you, and we will see you soon. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you very much for joining us. See you again soon. Bye-bye.